Thanks everybody for joining us this evening. Thank you, Lama Kathy, for being here with us and teaching us the book study and also for being here so late, your time.
Yeah, that's okay.
And anyway, so I wanted to say to everybody, please check out Santa Monica KTC's website. We have a lot of new information on there for you and for our membership, for the things that are happening at our center on Zoom. And also, if you would like a donation towards Lama Kathy this evening, you can do so through the link on the newsletter. You can also just go on our website, which is santamonicaktc.com. And with that, I will give it up to Lama Kathy, and maybe we can all mute until questions are asked, so we don't hear a lot of background noise. And yeah, thanks everybody for being here, and thank you, Lama Kathy, and thank you for the teaching.
Oh yeah, no, thanks very much, guys. I really appreciate it, and I love seeing you and talking with you regularly. It's so much fun to see how you're all doing, and I just want to thank you for your Dharma study and for your Dharma practice. So thanks very much. This, of course, is the week of Tibetan New Year, so it's a very special time at Tibetan Buddhist centers all over, and I'm sure that for all of you individually, it's been an exciting time, to refresh your practice. So because it's said that that at the beginning of the new year, the positive effects of actions are multiplied, as well as the negative effects of actions. So it's a good time to do virtuous things and not do non-virtuous things. So the first 15 days of the Tibetan New Year are a commemoration of an event that happened in the life of the Buddha, when he was challenged to a debate by non-Buddhist scholars. And in those days, debate was a great spectator sport. Throngs of people would come to watch the great scholars debate. And but the stakes were high, because if you lost the debate, you had to agree to convert to the other person's point of view. So the stakes were a little bit high for the Buddha in this particular situation. And so when it came to the time for him to do the debate, he spoke, of course, about Dharma, but then he also performed a miracle every day for 15 days. And so he won the debate. I don't know whether the other scholars converted to his point of view or not, but in any case, this particular time of the year, the first 15 days of the Lunar New Year, it's of course a waxing moon, therefore the energy is very positive and very good. And it is said that these first 15 days are called multiplier days, in that because of the connection to this incident in the life of the Buddha, it provides a blessing for the virtuous activity that's done at this time. So that's why a lot of folks will make extra offerings on their shrine. I have a few extra here. And some folks will make extra effort to do generosity, to offer generosity during this time, and so on. And so anyway, and of course, to study and practice Dharma. So with that in mind, we're continuing our work on Joyful Wisdom, Mingyur Rinpoche's book about the wisdom of Dharma. And I'm going to start where I left off last time. At least I'm going to start where I think I left off last time, which is in the initial sections of the book. And if I remember correctly, you guys will have to tell me. I feel like I left off at when he started talking about the Four Noble Truths. Now, I may be wrong. What do you guys remember? Do you remember what page we left off on, or what the section was in the book? Not everybody at once now.
I thought you covered through chapter 2 and we were stopped right at the beginning of chapter 3, but I might be wrong.
No, that's great. And that's tremendous because that's farther than I thought we were. So I'm very happy. I was looking at where I thought we were and it was like, oh my gosh, you mean we're only that far?
No, I might be. I hope I'm right.
So this is good. So this is the chapter 3 is called The Power of Perspective. And he's, of course, Mingyur Rinpoche is a great storyteller. And so he starts his chapter with a story. And of course, he also starts it with a quotation, the quotation from Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. He says, it is impossible to guard one's training without guarding the wandering mind. And you remember one of the sub themes of his book is how important mindfulness is. And that the very basic practice of quiet sitting meditation that we do on a regular basis is a foundation for all of the potential changes we can make in our mind and life based on our experience. And so having this opportunity to practice just basic sitting and getting a lot of benefit out of basic sitting and basic mindfulness, because it's where all change comes from. Because we live one thought at a time, one moment at a time, one experience at a time. And so that means that we are always changing. Our mind is always changing and always capable of change. And so the main idea in Buddhism is to create change from the inside. So in any case, he starts with a story. He said he was walking down a street in India where many of the roads are still paved with stones. He said, I'd set out in a hurry without putting on my sandals, a decision that he regretted because it was quite difficult to walk on bare feet on a stony road. Not long afterwards, he said, I happened to mention this experience to an Indian doctor. Oh, very good, he replied. And when I asked what he meant, the doctor explained that according to several ancient medical systems, applying pressure to various points along the soles of the feet stimulated activity in various organs and systems of the body, thus promoting overall health. So what he experienced initially as a painful experience was a shift in perspective when he talked to the doctor, and the doctor explained how that discomfort he felt in his feet was actually toning his internal organs and systems. So what he felt as discomfort of walking on a cobbled street was actually doing him some good. And so he said, then he said, the story that he was telling himself, he said the stones had not changed, but the story he told himself about the stones, that changed. And so this chapter is about that shift in perspective that happens when you can take one step back from the story that you're telling yourself about what's happening. If you remember in the first section of the book, when he was talking about the Four Noble Truths, he talked about the three kinds of suffering. The two kinds of suffering, the natural suffering and the self-created suffering. The natural suffering comes about because of things that happen in our lives, but the self-created suffering, he said, is caused by the stories we tell ourselves about what's going on. And so that's why this particular chapter is rather nice, because it reminds us about the power of the stories we tell ourselves. So I'm really happy to see that the next section of chapter 3 starts with a quotation by our own Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, who said, the way we experience things is simply the display of our minds. simply the display of our minds. And so what Mingyur Rinpoche said, although he said I had used some the same basic principle of shifting my perspective and working with the thoughts and emotions that had troubled me as a child, because you remember, he talked in the early part of the book about the fact that he suffered from a great deal of anxiety when he was young, and that the practice of quiet sitting meditation allowed him to the stories he was telling himself about it was able to help him suffer less because of what he was experiencing. So he said, even though I learned about this shift in perspective, he said, I hadn't really applied it to very many situations involving physical discomfort. He said it came as a shock to realize how deeply I had associated my physical body with the idea of me. And so he realized that there was a great power in the body itself, and the power of physical sensation to feed a storyline that's happening within us as an individual, and how the body is sort of central to the problem of self-grasping, which the Buddha had called central to the experience of suffering. And so he said, but there was an even more important lesson to be gained from the incident of walking on the cobbled street. He said, if I had not felt the discomfort in the first place, or if I'd surrendered to it or tried to resolve it in an ordinary way, for example, putting on my sandals, he said, every time I left my room, I would not have seen this subtle layer of conditioning. And then he said, since then, I have begun to develop a greater appreciation for those moments in which I experience pain or discomfort. Each of those discomforts, he said, is a seed of deeper understanding and an opportunity to get to know my mind a little better, because he's getting to know his stories about himself. And so he says, I don't mean to suggest that whenever I face a problem or feel irritation, I put on some sort of Buddhist detective cap and start rummaging through my mind, asking, what's the perspective here? What am I not seeing? He said, and then substituting another one. He said that's just a sneaky attempt to get rid of an uncomfortable situation, which reinforces the habit of seeing challenges as enemies to be conquered or bosses to be pacified. And he said that the process, the actual process, he says, involves simply staying with the situation and looking at it directly. Approaching experience in this way, he said, allows a bit of space to spontaneously open up around it, because when we're busy defining something as good or bad and evaluating something and judging something, then we don't have the opportunity to see anything other than that perspective. And he says, if there's a mind that can look at that experience, logically it follows that that mind is larger than the experience itself. And I think that's important. If there is a mind that can look at the experience that you're having, that means that there's part of you that's even bigger than the experience. A friend of mine, he said the perspective he got from Buddhism was that the mind itself is vast, and that we take this mind that's so vast and we cramp it down into this little idea of me or I, and then we act and react toward everything from me or I, rather than allowing the mind to sit and rest within itself. And so he says, in that split second of recognition, it becomes possible to catch a glimpse of mind's infinite grandeur. To see it as my father and other teachers described, he said, as an endless ocean, in which each moment of experience is nothing more than one among a series of waves, now rising, now falling, and never separate from a limitless expanse. And then he said this glimpse also provides a working basis for comprehending the second noble truth, because he had spent the previous chapters talking about the first noble truth, the truth of suffering and all of its ways of looking at it. He said, according to the teachings, he said the second noble truth, which is often translated as the origin or cause of suffering, and this is really, he said, why perspective is important. He said, according to the second noble truth, the cause of suffering lies not in events, but in the way we perceive those events and how we react and interpret our experience as it unfolds. Just like his story about the cobbled street, he experienced it one way when he was a shoeless guy walking on the cobbled street, and another when he realized he was giving his body, his organ systems, a healthy toning massage by hitting all of his reflexology points on his feet. So he said, then he talked about he talked about some of the extreme examples in Buddhism. He says one very striking example of the way in which perspective affects experience is drawn from the practice of devotees of certain Eastern religions who will set the tips of their fingers on fire as a means of relieving the sufferings of beings who experience a deeper and darker pain than any of us can imagine. The joy they have reported feeling and experiencing making offerings of their own bodies more than offsets whatever pain they feel. Well, he's not really encouraging us to go set our hands on fire. He's giving it as an example, an extreme example of the lengths that people go to and yet are worked with by themselves in their mind. Now, for us, it's not, he says it's not quite like that. He said a similar but less extreme example is massage therapy. Because in massage therapy, pressure is placed on certain parts of the body, and they will push on those pressure points in order to relieve and release muscle tension. And so in this particular situation, he talked about a friend who was receiving the massage and wanted it to be more effective, so said, "Press harder." I don't think I could do that. Personally, I'm not sure I could do that. But in any case, he said when the friend told her story, like, "I'm paying a lot of money for this massage, press harder." He said, "I had to laugh. One moment she was experiencing pressure that seemed to be unendurable, and a half an hour later she was demanding more." Her response to the basic situation changed according to her interpretation and expectations. And then he spends the whole next section talking about why. Why is that? And he said, as we go about our lives, he says, we depend for the most part on our capacity to make distinctions. In other words, to discriminate. We know good food from bad food, right? We know a proper temperature to be at and an improper temperature to be at. We go through our entire day choosing things, this over that, and discriminating. And he said, an important thing to bear in mind is that all distinctions are fundamentally relative. Ideas, judgments, sensations, and so on, they're all based on comparison. And Chöling Rinpoche talks about this in some of his teachings, where he said there's no short without tall, and there's no large without small. In other words, everything is relative. He said left only exists in relationship to right, and so on. And he says, as I understand through discussions with various scientists, Mingyur Rinpoche says, the capacity to make distinctions evolved in human beings as a survival tool. There is inarguably an advantage to distinguishing between plants and fruits that are poisonous and ones that aren't. And he said, likewise, it would be useful to distinguish between something to eat and something that might eat us. And he said, human beings respond in complicated ways to this distinction-making process. And he said, from a neurological point of view, it's our neurons giving us information. And these neurons are telling us what is good and what is not good, and giving you all the specifics about things. And then these are received by your brain, which then gives you the idea of how to make distinctions. And then he just spends the next page or two talking about how the brain works. And in other words, he says, though lengthy to describe all of this communication between the thousands of cells that make up our organs, our sense organs, and the neurological structures occurs in the fraction of a second. He said less than the time it takes to snap our fingers. He said the brain responds almost immediately, giving out chemicals that help us to respond to what we're experiencing. And this is very interesting. He said, at the same time, a series of links is established among the sense organs, brain structures, vital organs, and glands, a sort of instant messaging network that very simply creates an internal map of what we are experiencing. He uses the example of seeing a red rose and how that makes your brain react. He says, in other words, we're not really seeing the rose itself, but rather the concept of a red rose. See, here's the thing. We are only ever experiencing things. We don't really own that red rose. All we own is our impression of that red rose. The rose itself is not as important as what we think it is. And he said, the concept of a red rose, he said, is often conditioned by a broad range of factors, including circumstances surrounding our initial experience, memories, and expectations stored in various parts of the brain. And the most important of which is the difference between me, a self, and other, or me and not me. And the distinction of me, he said, as an entity inherently separate from, for example, a red rose, is itself an internal image that emerges from the interactions of other brain systems. And so he said, from all my discussions with people trained in various scientific disciplines, he says, it's clear that there are some differences of opinion as to how and when we experience things, how it happens. And then he said, me develops at birth. When an infant is separated from the body of his or her mother and begins to experience life as an individual being, facing an internal and external environment that is not altogether predictable. And so then he talks about what it's like to be an infant and how vulnerable the infant is and how they have to make their way in the world and so on. And then he says, let's see, then he said later, during the stage that many parents describe as the terrible twos, when children begin to assert an independent identity, more often than not by saying no, he said these concepts within oneself appear to have taken a more solid and definite shape. And so, as he says here, centuries before the development of Western science, the Buddha arrived at an understanding that suffering originates in the mind. That is, in the eye of the beholder. Although the terms he used are different from those of modern day biologists, the insights he offered are remarkably similar. And if you remember last time we talked about dukkha, the word for suffering, and it's sometimes translated as like discomfort, that like the feeling that something is not quite right. And then he said that the students who translated the early Pali transcripts into Sanskrit described the cause of suffering as trishna, or thirst. And in Tibet, they called it zimpa, which is grasping. So every generation has come up with a different term for it, but it involves this idea of me and not me, and grasping toward the me or the not me as being some fundamentally real thing. And when we grasp towards something, there's one of three ways we can respond to it: that we like it, that we don't like it, or that we're indifferent. So those are the three mental poisons described by the Buddha: attachment, aversion, and bewilderment. And he says these are called the three poisons, habits of relating to experience that are so deeply rooted that they cloud or poison the mind. Individually and in combination, they give rise to innumerable other attitudes or emotion, including pride, perfectionism, low self-esteem, or self-hatred, or jealousy and competitiveness. And he said, accordingly, some Buddhist teachings refer to these attitudes as afflictions or obscurations because they limit the way in which we interpret our experience, which in turn inhibits our potential to think, feel, and act. So these things bring about an experience that we then take on as being somehow real. And so he then tells a story about owning a car, and how difficult it is to own a new car because eventually it's going to get scratched, and so forth. He says, let's take an example. He talks about, he says, for example, he says, imagine you're driving down the road in your old worn out car and you pass a fancy new car that's just been dented in an accident. You might feel a little sorry for the owner, but you wouldn't necessarily feel any attachment to the car. A few months later, finding yourself in a position to trade in your old car, you visit a used auto lot, and there's a Mercedes available at an incredible price. It's actually the same car that you saw dented. But as soon as you sign the contract, it doesn't matter. That car is yours now. And you drive it home. And as you drive it home, a pebble cracks the windshield. Tragedy! My car is ruined. I'm going to have to pay to get it fixed. I love this series of things, because it's great, it's bad, it's great, it's bad. And it happens just like this. And it's all because of how we see things. And so one more point to make, and then we'll have discussion. He says, but now that it's your car, if the windshield is cracked, you experience anger, frustration, maybe a little fear. So he says, why not just stop? Why not just let go of the poisons and all of their offspring? If this were easy, of course, he said, we would all be Buddhas before we reach the end of this sentence. And so he said, according to the Buddhist teachings and commentaries by the masters, the three poisons and all the other mental and emotional habits are not in themselves the causes of suffering. Rather, suffering arises from attachment to those feelings. Attachment to those feelings. And let's see, yes, which is the closest you can get to the essential meaning of the Tibetan word zinpa, or grasping. He said, I've also heard it translated as fixation, which he says, I think captures more closely the deeper significance of the term. Zinpa is an attempt to fix in time and place that which is constantly moving and changing. So in other words, everything is impermanent. And because we don't like change and impermanence, we try to fix everything in place so that it doesn't change. And because of this attempt to pin things down, he said, it's not right, you know. And then he said, Zinpa is an attempt to fix in time and place that which is constantly moving and changing. But that's like killing butterflies, a student of mine recently exclaimed. And when I asked her what that meant, she described how some people make a hobby of capturing butterflies, killing them, and then pinning their bodies in glass or plastic display cases for the sheer pleasure of looking at the collection. And she says, such beautiful, delicate creatures, they're meant to fly. If they don't fly, they're not really butterflies anymore, are they? In a way, she was right. When we become fixed in our perceptions, we lose our ability to fly. So I think this is as far as I'm going to go right now, and see if there's more to say. But I don't know about you, but I've experienced a lot of fixations in my life. Some real stubborn ones that have been really hard to let go of. And I'm wondering what your experience of this is, if you're ever able to kind of catch yourself grasping. Have you been able to watch yourself and catch yourself doing it? And what do you do? I'm curious. You can raise your hand, or you can just unmute.
I'll go ahead and speak.
Yeah, please.
So when it comes to pain, is that same type of thing? You're fixating on it? Is that okay?
And
so
see, what's happening is there's like the sensation, but then there's the sensation itself, which is one thing. But then the other is where you own that sensation, like that's me. And then there's yet another layer of the I don't like this. There's like the emotional, right? So there's the experience that is just raw, the raw experience. And then there's the overlay of the story. Okay. And then there's the mind that is experiencing that pain and talking to you about it. So tell me more.
So, okay. So what you're saying is if I just like, let's say, just let it go, like, don't think that it's bad. Like, it's just a sensation. It's just a feeling. That maybe it won't be so, I think, because I'm concentrating on it, like, oh, I don't want to feel this. It's like, I should rush and take something to make it go away.
Mm-hmm.
I think I get something with your teaching about that, because I think if I just not label it as being awful, that it won't be that bad.
Right. Well, actually, he gets into that in the next section of the book. So so you're sort of presaging where he's going, which is kind of cool all by itself. But you can kind of see what the problem is, right? I think he really stated it very clearly, because there's the pain itself, and there's the story we tell ourselves about it, and then that we like or dislike it, right? And so there's a lot going on there. And I think that, but what he's inviting us to do is to consider that there's a different way to respond. You probably can't change the moment of the pain itself, but you can start to work with the layer that's the story. And the layer that's the story and the layer that's the like and dislike. Ooh, I've got an echo. Is that on my computer, do you think? Should I change my settings or something? Who's
Max,
our, do we have a Zoom expert here? Who's,
yeah, I think Max,
it very well
not a
could
Zoom.
be.
Lama Kathy, maybe try to, can you just mute and unmute again and see if it's still
Oh,
happening?
sure. Okay, so let's see if that changes it.
Yeah, it seems to work. No,
Okay, I'd never experienced that before, so thank you.
thank you.
What I'm thinking, Lisa, is that as meditators, we have experienced this in small ways. Let's just use a small, easy example. You're sitting and you're meditating and you have an itch or a pain in your leg or something. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said, he said, one of the things you can do, he said, is take a moment and tell yourself, hey, I don't have to do anything about this pain just now. And then go back to the technique of watching the breath. And then he said, if the pain persists and comes back to you, well, then you can change your position to try to relieve the pain. He said, but the point is, he said, at first, tell yourself you don't have to do anything about it so that you're able to sit with it for just a few seconds longer than you thought you could. And he said, and this begins to give you a view of how your perception of something can change even just a little bit. So that gives you an idea of what's possible over time. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mhm.
So my friends in the 12-step recovery tradition like to use the phrase, don't should on yourself. Don't use the word should, like I should just let this go. That's not what is happening in Buddhism. Buddhism, we're asking ourselves to be curious about the situation rather than fatalistic, like, oh, this is awful, like, well, we have to ask ourselves, well, okay, so let's see what's really going on here. And look at the reactiveness and see if there's a different way to experience that thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Because otherwise it just becomes another excuse for us to look at ourselves and judge ourselves badly. Like, why can't I let this go? Well, because it hurts. That's why. And because we've spent our whole lives reacting to pain in a completely different way, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've owned the pain, we've named it, we've called it my pain, and we've built a story about it. And I think that this is one of the reasons why the Lojong tradition, the Lojong tradition of mind training, Lo means mind and Zhang means training. I think that that's a part of the reason that that's been so helpful to so many people, because we're not going to set our fingers on fire. Okay. So I don't think we're going to practice that kind of wildness. We're not going to be doing that. However, what we might do is we might say, this pain that I have right now, may my pain contain the pain of all sentient beings. And by my working through this moment of pain, may I and all other beings be free of this kind of pain, and may we become Buddhas, which is the complete freedom from pain. So it turns our experience of pain into an aspirational moment. We have the opportunity to have an inspirational moment. It's not going to make the pain go away, but it's going to change momentarily how we experience that. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Because then you can make it kind of like a good thing. Why is it a bad thing?
I mean, just for the heck of it, just
Yeah.
for the heck of it, it's like you're exercising with it. You're just giving yourself a possible idea of what it could be,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
rather than than saying I should be able to let this go. No, it's not like that. It's like, well, why don't I see what happens when I think about other beings in that?
Yeah.
Can you
And
repeat that statement that you made about it? Like, may I and
Oh,
all other
sure.
pain?
Yeah. Yeah, it goes like this. Let's see. May my pain or my difficulty, you can use pain or difficulty kind of interchangeably. May my pain or difficulty contain, or stand in for, contain the pain or difficulty of all beings, because it's when we kind of go down the drain sometimes with a story. A story takes us kind of down the drain of sadness, because we're really afflicted and we're just kind of going down with it, going down. And so when we think of others, we open that up. It's like, it's not just me going through this. There are lots of other people experiencing this right now. Let me think about them for a second. So that's kind of what's happening in that first statement. May my pain contain the pain of all beings. And by my working with this moment of pain, may I and all beings be free of pain. I mean, so now we're aspiring to go beyond the pain. Now, that doesn't mean we're gonna.
yeah.
But it does mean that we're going to try to shift that perspective for a moment and use that pain as a springboard to make an aspiration to be a Buddha someday, right? So the other part of that is, may I and all beings be free of it, and may we all become Buddhas, which is the complete freedom from this kind of fixation and pain. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Because
Absolutely.
you can
Maya,
obsess
did you
about
get it? Maya, did you get it?
Yeah, I did. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay, and thank you, Lisa. I mean, what I really like about your question is that it reveals that we all want to be different. We grapple with these ideas, and part of us is excited by the ideas, but part of us is like a little fearful or concerned, like, what am I going to be?
exactly.
Yeah, I get it. But see, and this is why I think that the Lojong approach is a good approach, because it strengthens our aspiration and it strengthens our love. Even if it's just theoretical love, may I and all beings be free of this kind of pain. It's still, it puts us in a different place than we were when it's just me going down the drain with my pain.
Exactly. Yeah.
And in addition, people who practice do mantra meditation can visualize a Buddha or Bodhisattva as a way of shifting their perspective regarding a pain. Trungpa Rinpoche, in his book Medicine Buddha Teachings, says that one thing that is done in the Medicine Buddha practice is that when a person is feeling a pain, he said, sometimes they will visualize a small form of the Medicine Buddha at the place that hurts. And that Medicine Buddha, which is made of light, is giving off this blue healing, like liquid light. And so again, it's not making the pain go away, but it's changing our perspective of how we're experiencing it in the moment. So it's different. And the Mahamudra practitioners can do this foreground background thing, of looking at the mind that's experiencing the pain, which puts it at a one step remove, like look at the mind that's experiencing this thing, and you won't find it. it has no color, it has no shape, it has no location, it has no beginning, it has no end, which is what Mingyur Rinpoche was indicating earlier in this chapter, when he said that, let's see if I can find it again, because that was a really good one, a really good comment. Yeah, no, I'm not going to be able to find it. Oh, here it is. He said, if there is a mind that can look at an experience, it logically follows that that mind is larger than the experience itself. And that's like like an indication of something that's beyond our current recognition. It's beyond what we can put together right now, what we can perceive. Anyway, thanks. More discussion. And yeah, if you have a question.
So what I heard from various different teachings is that, one of the approaches is using Tonglen.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, I'm not sure if this is where he's coming from in this, but the Taisyitu Rinpoche, at the end of his teachings, he always recites the same prayer where he says, when I am happy, may my merit flow to others, may joy and benefit fill the sky. When I am unhappy, may the sorrow of all beings be mine, may the ocean of suffering run dry. And so it's like, I'm not sure if it's the same concept of taking on, since you're suffering, take on the suffering of everybody else who's suffering in the same way, and just sort of, I'm not sure how to express whether it somehow just gets internalized and broken up and dissolved, and I'm not sure how to explain it, but maybe you can talk about it some more.
Oh yeah. I have a cute story to tell. I was there when he decided that he wanted everybody to say that prayer. And it was I forget which year it was one of his Mahamudra instructions. And he said, does anybody have the English for this prayer? And I said, I do, because I had memorized it. I had memorized the English because it
is it I found that similar text in the Sadhana for Chö. Is that where you got it from?
I don't know for sure. Oh, well, no, it's from it was written in the 12th century by an Indian Pandit named Shakya Sri. So it's attributed to a real life person, Shakya Sri, 12th century. And but Jamgon Khantrul the Great quotes this prayer in the Torch of Certainty. And that's where I had memorized it from. Because, and so when Situ Rinpoche first let his students know in this one Mahamudra program, he said, I'm trying to find a good English translation for this. He says, but I don't have one. And I'm like, I got one. So I gave it to him. And then it's been developed beyond, what I gave him. I just gave him something simple. But that makes me so happy to hear you say this, because this prayer meant a lot to me when I read it.
It means a lot to me too. And the last time I saw it on the teaching, they actually had the English subtitles. And so I stopped the video and wrote it down because it meant so much to me. And I say that prayer every day now at the end of my practice.
Mm-hmm. It's
What are the actual words to the prayer?
Sure, I'll you want to go ahead and read that read that out for us, Tara?
I could either type it in the chat or I could just recite it out loud. Yeah, I can type it into the chat because I have it memorized.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because it goes like it's when I am happy, right? May my merit flow to others, may its blessings fill the sky. That was the Judith Hansen translation, but yours is a little different. But so it's like that. And I really like this because when I am happy, may my merit flow to others, may its blessings fill the sky. I mean, wow, right? you know? And because that is, you know, the whole idea of Tonglen and Lojong in general, because Tonglen is a practice of Lojong. Lojong is like the overarching topic, but Tonglen is a practice of Lojong. And the idea of sharing one's happiness with all beings is brilliant, because Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said that, he said when he was a boy in Tibet, he said, we didn't have any money, you know? And he said, but he said, we were able to make offerings of every beautiful thing we experienced. And we made offerings of those to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And we imagined that they were shared by all beings. Okay, so here you go. Thank you, Tara. It's when I am happy, may my merit flow to others, may joy and benefit fill the sky. I like that. When I am unhappy, may the sorrow of all beings be mine. May the ocean of suffering run dry. That's brilliant. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant, because we need to have a background that's as powerful as a positive background that's as powerful as the negative background, because we can have background thoughts about everything, right? That we can have like a storyline that underlies everything that happens to us. Like, my life is terrible because this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. Or you can say, my life is wonderful because this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. And so, but what Lojong and Tonglen is trying to do is change that background and give us the perspective that we are bodhisattvas in training, and that we can use whatever is happening to us to benefit other beings. So I'm sorry, Tara, did you have more to say about that?
No, but I just, this teaching has been really important to me recently, because I went through some very difficult things, and I've been paying a lot of attention to the stories that I tell myself about it in my head. And I've found that I can instantly now, I can notice that, oh, I'm telling myself negative. And I can actually stop myself and say, that's not true. And I can change the story and change my mind and change my feelings about something very quickly now, which I wasn't able to do before. So it's been very helpful to me to notice the stories and think, I don't want to do that. I don't want to tell myself that story, because that story is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been super helpful to me, not just to, sit there and just sort of, spiral down into my negative thoughts and sadness or anxiety or whatever it is, and just say, you know what, I can tell myself a different story. And the reality is different, because the reality is only in my head. Everything that's going on is my projection. And so if I change the story that I tell myself, then that changes my reality, and I don't have to sit there and suffer and stew and, with my negative thoughts. So it's helped me a lot. And I really, that particular prayer has been so helpful to me.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the fact that you recite it for yourself every day, because the little formula that I was talking about in the when Lisa and I were talking, that little formula, it's in Jamgon Khenpo's book, A Great Path of Awakening. And I just wrote a sort of a little more modern interpretation of it. But I encourage people to memorize that. And I just say, read it out loud to yourself every day. May my
I wrote it down and I memorized it, and I say it with my dedication every day. And the last thing after my dedication, that's the last thing that I say when I end my morning meditation. And so it's just like, yes,
it's there for you because you put it in here. It's there for you. And then it can help reset. It can help to reset, because the fact that we can reset is kind of freaky, because a lot of folks, when they do shamatha meditation, it's the first time they realize that they can actually hit a reset button on their thoughts. Because when you notice a thought in meditation, and then you label it thinking and you let it go, that's the very first moment for many people that they recognize that they're actually thinking something and it's having an impact on them. And I call that the capacity to take one step back. You take a step back from being in that thought to observing that thought. And when you take that step back, then the thought changes. And then if you then apply other types of techniques to them, then the storyline changes, and it's really kind of interesting.
Well, I mean, I have struggled for so many years with anxiety and depression, and this technique has basically eliminated it because I'm able to change the story in my head. And once I change the story in my head, then I'm not anxious or depressed anymore. The other line that I heard so many times, it's just like hammered into my brain is,
I get it.
if you can fix something, fix it and don't worry. If you can't fix it, then don't worry.
That's
And so
Shantideva.
I have to repeat that to myself over and over and over again. It's just like,
Yeah.
okay, can you fix it? If you can fix it, fix it and go on. If you can't fix it, don't worry about it. Why worry?
Yeah, I know.
Good old Shantideva.
Good old Shantideva. Yeah, you can count on Shantideva. Well, thank you very much. I see from the time that we're just about done, and I want to see, I have time for one more comment and question. And thanks again for sharing, everybody who's shared so far.
If anybody has a way of writing that prayer down and sending it to all of us, that would be really great,
Super.
because that would be very helpful. I could identify
The one
with
that I typed into the
what you
chat,
were
or
saying. I'm sure it would be very
People can't
helpful.
read it. Yeah, some
the
people
one that I
can't
typed
read
into
it.
the chat?
Yes, yeah, I know you put it in the chat, but some
Oh,
people
you should be able
can't
to copy
access
and
that.
paste it, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
I'll tell you what, could someone from the central office there at Santa Monica KTC grab that out of chat, and then just make sure you put it in one of your newsletters coming up, okay?
Oh, that would be good.
Good idea.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind doing that, that'd be super, because not everyone, sometimes if people are accessing Zoom on a mobile device, it's getting to chat is a little tricky. So because I've encountered that from other folks. So if you can grab that, that'd be super.
Jody said in the chat she will email it. So.
Oh, very good. She'll email it. Thank you. That's great. Well, there's time for one more if there's one more out there. Yeah. Not able to hear. Okay. Okay, well then I think we'll stop for the evening then. It looks like once again, we're not going to get through the book quickly. It looks like it's going to just take some more time. So I'm sorry, but I think it's still going to work out all right. So it's probably going to be a multi-part class.
I don't think we're in a hurry.
Very good. Very
What's
good.
the title of the book again, Lama
Yeah,
Kathy?
sure. Yeah, the title of the book is Joyful Wisdom. Joyful Wisdom.
By who?
It's Mingyur Rinpoche.
Oh, yes. But
yeah,
that prayer in the chat is very, very well known, right?
It's super famous.
Yeah. Isn't
super
it?
famous. We're so
Yeah.
lucky. We're so lucky that these things have been promulgated in modern times. I mean, can
I
you
know,
imagine?
we really
From
are.
the 12th century to today. I mean, it's just freaky. It's
It is extraordinary if you think about it.
You
It really
know,
is.
You know something Kempo Rinpoche said one time, he said, the Buddhist teachings, he says, they are as helpful today as they were 2,600 years ago. And he says, it's just like water. Water refreshes now as it did centuries ago, because it's something that we need. The Dharma is.
That's an understatement. I mean, if
Thing that-
we ever needed it badly, it's
So
now.
thanks
Thanks.
for sharing that. Okay, okay, good deal. All right, so we'll have to say goodnight for now.
Thank you,
Uh,
Lama Kathy.
Yeah,
Thank
but I want to dedicate encourage everybody to dedicate their merit. Yeah, and don't forget, now through March the 7th, you've got lots of you've got like extra good merit coming, because it's the first 15 days of the new year, so there's a lot of good energy there. So so pull that together, and we'll dedicate it to suffering beings. Through this merit, may all achieve the omniscience of Buddhahood. May it defeat our common enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may we free all beings. May we free all beings. May we free all beings.